Thanks, Cindy. As Cindy said, I'm Jill Finley from Jillily Studio, and I'm going to show you an applique method for this cute little bluebird. And I've got one made right here for you. So this is what he looks like when he's all done with the applique. And I'll teach you how to do that, and you're going to have really good results. So let me show you some of the things that you're going to need to do my applique method. First of all, you'll need a pattern, and Riley Blake has the pattern. It's a free pattern, and you can get it, like Cindy said, in 3 versions: the applique, foundation piecing, and traditional piecing. And we're going to use the applique pattern today. The applique pattern comes with some instructions, and I do want to point out that the applique instructions are for fusible applique, which is just great if that's the method you want to use. Today I'm going to teach you a method that will give you turned edges so you don't have any raw edges, and you'll have beautiful results. So it's a little different from the pattern. And then the pattern sheet that has all of the shapes on it. That's a downloadable on the Riley Blake site. And then some of the tools that I use, first of all, we're going to need a template. And to make my template, I use maker paper. And this is my maker paper. It's a plastic coated paper, similar to freezer paper, except that, I don't know if you can see on camera, probably not, but it is 3 times thicker than regular freezer paper. So it's really nice because it has a nice hand to it. It gives you a thick template, and it doesn't distort as much as freezer paper does. So it doesn't bubble and all of that, like some of the stuff we get with freezer paper. And it doesn't shrink as much, which is nice. So, and the nice thing about maker paper is it is an 8.5 by 11 sheet. So you can just print out your template. In fact, I think this template, or this pattern is printed right on the freezer paper. So put it in your printer, whichever way it goes. In my printer, it goes with the paper side down, and then it prints on the paper side. So you don't want to print on the shiny side. Print on the paper side, and that will provide you the templates. All right, the next thing you're going to need is, of course, you'll need fabric, and I've got my cute little fabrics right here, my background and my fabrics for my applique. And then I use a few tools in my applique method. First of all, you'll need a starch brush and this is the Jillily Studio Quilter's Digit. It's a little tool to help you manipulate the fabric so you don't get burned. And my applique glue, which is an archival quality basting glue. Let's turn that so you can see it. It's acid-free and pH neutral. It's safe to leave in your fabrics, in your quilt, so that you don't have to wash it out. It is water soluble. And then my polka dots, which we'll use when we're stitching. And the polka dot's a little sticky thimble you put on the end of your finger that allows you to push the back of your needle so that you don't get poked. And then, of course, you'll need some needles. And all of these tools come in my applique set. The applique set also has the instructions for my applique method. And this method will give you beautiful results in an easy way to do it. And the applique set is carried by Riley Blake, distributed by them. So tell your local quilt shop to order it, and then you can get that. All right, and then we're going to need some starch as well. Of course, you'll need scissors and an iron and an ironing board and some basic stuff. So let's get going. I'm going to set my stuff aside here and bring my iron over. First thing I'm going to do, remember I have that template set printed out, and I'm going to fuse it to one more sheet of maker paper. And that's because it will give me an even thicker template that I can reuse many times. So I'll put these 2 papers together, both with the shiny side facing down on my ironing surface, and then press. They're going to also stick to your ironing surface, and that's okay. We want them to stick together really good without any bubbles. And it might take, depending how hot your iron is, might take a little bit of time for that heat to go through both pieces of paper. And then once it's all fused together, I just peel it off my ironing surface. Then I've got a nice heavyweight template, which I'm going to cut out. I'm going to cut this face piece out first. Let me just set this aside. This is the little piece for the face of the cute little bird. And just cut around the... Now, when you're cutting, you want to use long strokes with your scissors, not just short little ones, because whatever you cut with your template, that's the shape your piece is going to be. You don't want, when you're cutting your fabric, you can be a little bit quicker, rougher. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the template you want to be as perfect as possible because that's the shape you'll end up with. So I'm going to turn it over and check and see if I've got any rough edges. I want to smooth those out, make it nice and smooth. Okay, now the next thing I do is take a piece of fabric. Now let's refer to our cute little bird here. Here's the one I made before. I'm going to put it right there. And my face is out of this green. Oh, and by the way, these fabrics that I'm using for the bird, let me just pull them right in here. These are all from the Basics collection from Riley Blake called Kisses. And I love this collection because it's got so many colors of blue, which makes the really cute bird. All right, so I'm using green for his face, after all that about the blue. Now I'm going to use green, but it's okay. And I'm going to place this on the back, on the wrong side of the fabric, and just press that with the shiny side down until it sticks to the fabric. And then we'll cut out around that, leaving about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, approximate. Doesn't have to be exact, and like I said, it can be kind of rough because all those raw edges are going to be turned to the inside. I've got one here cut out already, and that's, just press it, just make sure it's sticking. That's all ready to go. Now the next thing we're going to do is get our spray starch and spray a little bit into a container or the lid of your starch, and it's going to foam up because it's got a lot of air in it. And as soon as that air falls out, it's just going to liquefy and look like water. So I'm going to take my little starch brush, handy tool, and just get some starch on my brush and just paint the seam allowance of my little piece. Just the seam allowance. I want that to get wet. I don't want my template to get wet if possible. Of course, the edge of it might get a little wet, but if you just paint it on the outside edge of your seam allowance, osmosis will move that moisture until it's right next to the seam, the edge of the template, because that's where we want to crease. And we're wanting the starch to hold that crease. Now I've got my little, this is a Jillily Studio quilter's digit, and I call it a digit because it's instead of your finger. So instead of using your finger, you're going to use this digit so that you don't get burned. Put it in your hand, just in the palm of your hand, and then turn it over, and then you're just going to use it like that as you pull the fabric over. Now, I'm right-handed, so I'm using my iron with my right hand and my digit in my left hand. And that's going to feel awkward to you if this is the first time you've done this. You're going to want to pick up your digit like a pencil in your dominant hand. So don't do that, because it's good to have a hot, heavy object in your dominant hand. This is the voice of experience. Okay, now we're going to take this iron and just push the edge up over the edge of the template. See how easy that is? I know that for the camera, I'm going to move it up here so that you can see a little better. And see, as I push that over, I can grab with my little digit and pull the fabric tight against the template and press that fold nice and tight. Turn this around, do the other side, and I'll pull this edge until it's nice and tight against the template. The digit allows you to manipulate that fabric. Now I wanted to show you this edge where we've got a point. Make sure that you press not just to the end of the template, but all the way down that edge of the fabric so that you have a fold which goes all the way down off the fabric. That way when you pull this edge over, it creates a nice little, a nice pocket there for your extra fabric. So now I'm going to do the second edge, and I'm going to hold this first edge with my template, with my digit, so that it doesn't unfold, and then just push that edge over. And I'll just leave my iron there long enough for that to give you a nice crease. Now you can see that I have nice smooth edges all the way around my template. I have a little bit of extra fabric sticking out here at the fold. That's called a flag. See that little flag there? And don't worry about that. Leave it, don't cut it off. If you cut it off, you're going to have a lot of loose threads, and it'll kind of pull out of your seam. So you want to leave that as long as possible. And when I'll show you how to tuck that in when we get to the stitching. Okay, now I'm going to remove my template, and now that's ready to apply to my block. Let's do a few more pieces. You'll notice that I like to use the side of my iron to push the edge of the seam allowance up over the template rather than the tip, and that's because I have a lot of real estate there. So I have a great, and that's another reason why I like to use a big iron. There are some people that do this method with a small little craft iron, but I love using a big iron, and I'll tell you why. It's because I have a lot of surface area, so it works quickly and it dries that starch quickly, and also it's really hot and heavy. And those are all really good things when you're doing this method. So now we've got the little belly is done, and you'll notice that I have 2 flags sticking out at the ends here. Wherever you have a point, you'll have a flag of fabric. Just leave that. We're going to tuck it in when we get to the stitching part. Now this one is an important piece I want to show you a detail on. This is the tail, and you can see that the pattern, the template, has a dotted line on one edge here. And that dotted line means you don't need seam allowance here. So you can see that I've cut it out with seam allowance all the way around, but where the dotted line is, I didn't cut any seam allowance. And the reason is because that piece is going to go underneath another piece, so you don't need seam allowance. It's just going to stick underneath there, and so you won't need to turn that edge. Okay, so now we're going to prepare this piece with the seam allowance around this 2 sides, basically, and leave the seam allowance off of the dotted edge side. There we go. You see that? And then we'll put the iron here and just push that edge up over. Turn it so that I can grab it here. And as I'm moving around this curve, I'm going to pull with my quilter's digit until I get the edge folded over. And remember to fold your edge all the way down off the edge of the fabric. Once that's done, then we'll turn the other edge over the top of it. Kind of like wrapping a present. Such a cute little present, right? Okay, there's our tail. And see that edge? The raw edge is going to go underneath this wing, and you won't even see it. Okay, here's the beak. Now this is a tiny little piece, but it still can be done. Now when you have a tiny piece, still give yourself, the tendency is to cut your seam allowance really narrow. Still give yourself a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance, because if you need to trim it down after, you can, but it's easier to get it to fold over if you have enough fabric. So good grief. I've pressed that one side all the way down, turn around, and I'll press this other side. And then I'm going to just tell you a little trick, because this is such a tiny little piece. So you'll notice on my block, the beak sits on top of the bird, and that's because his head's kind of looking forward. But if you want to put the beak underneath your pieces, then you don't have to turn that other edge. So on this model, we're going to not turn that other edge. I'm just going to leave that raw edge sticking out there. And then we're ready to remove all of our pieces. So we'll start with the beak, since I've got it in my hand. Remove all the pieces and see how that's keeping the edges nice and crisp. So I do have a point here that I'm going to have to turn this flag under, and it won't be hard to do. I've removed the template from that one. I'm going to take it out of this wing, take it out of this belly and the main body, and see, I can reuse those templates. And then we're going to, that's how they go together, kind of like a puzzle. And then the beak on this one I'm going to put underneath. So it's a little different than this one. You can do this way, but I just thought I'd show you another way to make it easier. All right, so we've got our pieces ready. We're ready to attach those to our background. Let me move these out of the way and get our background fabric. I know I've got it. Oh, here it is. Okay, this is one of the cute prints from the Hush 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 collection, which is Riley Blake's fabric with the low volumes. Isn't it so cute? And there's lots to choose from, and I'm using the one that I designed, of course. And this is kind of a little architectural print, which is kind of fun. So we're going to, we've got our pieces all prepped, and now we're going to use the Appliqué glue to glue the pieces down. It comes with a little storage cap on it, and you just twist that storage cap off, and then this little baggie on the side holds the tip, which is a nylon tip so that your glue doesn't stick to it, and you won't get stuck glue in there. It's so great because you can screw it, just screw it on. Now you have your tip, and then there's a tip cover right there. So isn't that nice? Because you can unscrew this little tapered tip, so that you can wash it out and then you won't get clogs in your glue. Now the taper tip is great because it's wider at the base and very narrow at the tip. And what that does is it allows the glue, some air up into the tip, so that when you get done putting a dot of glue on, tap it and the glue will drain back down into the bottle and you won't get any stuck glue up in there. Okay, so we're ready. We're going to start with the bird's body, and I'm going to use this one as a guide. I'm upside down for you, but I can't put the bird together upside down. I'm afraid it'd be weird. So we're going to put just a drop of glue here in the seam allowance, about every 1/2 inch to inch. Depends how long it's going to be before you get around to stitching. The glue is going to hold it in place as long as you need. I've had glue, some glue in projects for over a year, and it's just fine. And then I'm going to just kind of center that, apply that to my background. Now the glue, you'll notice, is just in the seam allowance. So it's holding the seam allowance down to the background, but it's not holding the top down. And that's important because we don't want to put the glue in the middle of the piece, because we don't want to glue the piece down. We want the piece to be free to puff up. See how when you hand stitch a piece like this, it gives a nice little curve to that, and it looks like applique, because it is. And so this, we only want to glue the seam allowance. Now on this piece, we have those 2 flags, and I'm going to have to turn those after we get around to stitching. So I don't want to put any glue near those flags. So I'm going to start about 1 inch away from the tip so that I don't have to undo the glue when I'm trying to turn that flag. That's a little dot right there. And then just eyeball this. This is an easy little pattern to kind of eyeball. That's where that detail goes. And then the face. We've got a little flag on this one too. So I'm not putting any glue by the tip. And this piece goes right here. There we go. And then this piece goes here. We'll do the tail first. And now when you're first starting this method, you're going to say, oh my gosh, it's taking forever. And the thing is, it might seem like it because this prep stage does take a bit of time. Oh, let me show you this. See how this little bird body had a little tail right there? I mean a flag right there. I'm not going to worry about that flag because it's going to be underneath. So we're not going to worry about that one at all. Anyway, the prep work in this method takes about 75 to 80% of your time. So don't be panicked if you think it's taking forever, because once you've got this done, you're really mostly done. Then when you get to stitching, it's just a matter of kind of mindless, grabbing the thread and stitching. You don't have to add, there's a thread, there's a little thread, there we go. You don't have to add one piece at a time from a pattern that you cut out, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, and now you can't find piece 24D that's supposed to go here. This way, you prep all your pieces at once, glue down everything at once. Let's get our little beak. And that way, your block now becomes portable, and you don't have to refer to your pattern or your placement diagram. All you have to have with you is this block and a needle and thread, and you can be stitching this anywhere. So I love applique for this fact, that I can use bits of time that I don't usually use for sewing because I'm away from my machine. So when I'm watching a stupid movie that my husband picked out, or a football game, you know, there's a lot of timeouts in those football games, a lot of commercials, and I love football. But I always have a block with me while I'm watching a game, because you know, those are 4 hours long. You can get a lot done. All right. Now our little piece is all glued down. I'm going to just kind of show you how we'll tuck those flags in. Maybe I'll move this up here so the camera can see better. Turn him around so he makes sense to you. All right, when I come to a flag, let's do this little blue flag. When I'm stitching, I'm going to stitch down this side, and when I get to the point, I'll turn my needle and just tuck that flag. Grab it and tuck it right underneath. Just grab and tuck as I'm going with my stitches. Here's this green one. Let's do this green flag. Grab it and tuck it. Now I'm not going to do it with my quilter's digit like I'm showing you here. I just kind of sweep those threads underneath. I'm going to be doing it with my needle, but I'm showing you with my digit so that you can see it. Did you see how I tucked that under? Now this one, I would stitch down this side first, Stitch down the side first, because all the way to the point, because when you get there, you're going to tuck this big chunk of fabric against this wall of stitching. You don't want it to come out the other side. So stitch here, grab this flag, tuck it under, and once that's stitched, it would look great, and away you go. See how easy that was? This flag was kind of harder to see because it's so dark, but you grab the flag and just push it underneath. Just kind of fold it. I'm not doing a very good job here. There you go. So that's how that's done, and I do it when I'm stitching. Now, if you're going to machine stitch, you want to tuck in any flags before you go to the machine. So I'll tuck a flag, put a dot of glue there, and glue it down so that when I go to the sewing machine, I don't have to stop and lift my presser foot, my needle, to tuck that flag under. Now I'm ready to just stitch right along here. And you can either do a top stitch or a decorative stitch, or I use a little teeny tiny mini zigzag. Okay, I've got my needle ready. I'm ready to start stitching, but I want to tell you a little bit about the thread. I use an all cotton thread. This is Aurifil, and many of you are familiar with that. It's a quilter's staple, and I'm going to use a dark color. Normally you would match your thread to the colors you're stitching on, but I want you to be able to see the stitching, so I'm using this darker blue. But Aurifil is a long staple Egyptian cotton, and it's really strong, and so I like to use the 50 weight, and I'm going to need a polka dot on my finger. And a little tip about thread while I'm getting this out. Did you know that, see if I can get this out. Did you know that thread kind of has a microscopic nap? And you can, it matters which way you thread your needle. So I'm going to stick my polka dot right where I push the back of my needle. If you don't know where your polka dot goes, just stitch for a few minutes and you'll know right where it goes. Okay, back to the thread. So it has like a microscopic nap. So that means that it's going to slide through your fabric better going one way than it would the other way. So when you cut your thread for hand sewing, the end that you cut is the end that you're going to put the knot in. And the lead end is the end that your needle will be in to stitch. If you can't remember which is which, think of it on your sewing machine. The lead end goes into the needle. Just a little tip, it'll help your thread to slide through better. If you're having trouble with your thread, like tangling or knotting or not acting right, undo your needle and thread the other end, and not the other end. You'll be amazed. You'll just be amazed. Okay, we strive to amaze here. I've got a thread. I've got a thread with a knot in it, and I'm going to come up from the wrong side of my background, and I'm going to bring my needle right out the fold of my applique piece. And you can see there, I hope you can see, that my needle is going parallel to my background. It's not coming straight up. I don't want to come straight up, because if I come straight up, that means my threads are going to go from the top down to the background, and you'll see them. And we're going to hide these stitches. So I'm going to come right out the fold, and then I reach underneath the fold and dive my needle into the background, travel to the next stitch, come out the fold. So I do all my traveling on the back. That's moving from one stitch to another, and I'm going to come out the fold. And you know, normally, I hope I'm doing this right because I have my glasses on, and I'm one of those people that has to take their glasses off to sew. So I can see better if I take them off. All right, I'm going underneath the applique into the background and turn and come out the fold again. See that? And the polka dot enables me to stitch quickly without getting poked. So as I'm moving my needle, see, I've got good control with that polka dot because it's got a nice little texture on it. Helps me to stitch quickly and without getting poked. And of course I've got a little knot right there. There we go. All right, can you see that now? You can see that the edge that I have, I'm just almost unthreaded that, sorry. The edge that I've stitched, you can start to see it rolling down to meet the background, which will give me a nice little curve and a puff. If I was to stitch this applique on my machine, I would do a little stitch that covered the top of it, so my applique piece will lay flat with a nice folded crisp edge. It's going to look just like that, stitched down. But if I stitch by hand, I'm going to take the edge of my applique piece and roll it down to meet the background, which will give me that nice curve and puff. I'm going to show you one more time. I'm going to take the stitch, I'm going to push the needle out the fold, and then I want you to, I hope the camera can watch this. If you were right here, I could show you. Now, as I pull this thread, watch that edge just turn down. Did you see that? It rolled right down to meet the background. Okay, and that way we can't see any stitches. So even though I'm using this dark, almost black thread, you can't see any stitches. It's just like magic. And here we go, around the head of this bird. It's pretty quick. And you know, you'll also notice that I'm not taking teeny tiny stitches because there's no need to. My seam allowance is already turned. When we do needle turn method, then we have to take tiny stitches because while we're stitching, we're also turning the edge. And with this method, the prep is already done, the edges are already turned, so you can take pretty long stitches, sometimes as much, almost a 1/4 inch, and it doesn't matter at all. As you're going around a curve, of course, you're going to need to shorten your stitches a little bit. So you can see that little place that I've stitched already. See how it's got that nice little curve, kind of a puff it creates. I'm going to go over here and do the beak, so that I'm going to just pop on over there so that you can see how we turn the flag under. So let me get in position. I'm going to come right out the very fold of the applique shape. Okay. Now, underneath, move to the next stitch. We want to stitch one side down first, and that's the side we're going to push the flag against. So we want that that side to be all stitched so the flag doesn't come out the other side. Now, I can see my thread a little bit on this one. It might be partially because I'm having to hold this like this, so I can't really see very good. As I get close to the point, I'm going to take my stitches closer together because I want to create that little wall of stitching so that the flag doesn't pop out. And when I get to the end, I've got my needle coming out. My last stitch has my needle coming out the very tip of the point. One thing I didn't mention is that I stitch from right to left because I'm right-handed. So I'm going to stitch right to left. If you're left-handed, you're going to do the reverse, stitch left to right. But I stitch on the edge that's away from my body. So instead of stitching here from right to left, I'd stitch over here. And as I get to this side, I'll turn this around so that it's away from my body, so I don't look down that edge. I am seeing it from the top. So on the edge away from you, from right to left, and then when we get to a point, I pull this out, and now, see, I've stitched right to left. I'm going to turn this around so I can go down the other side. And what I will do here first is just kind of tug on that point, just gently, so that I can sharpen the point, hold it there, grab this little flag with my needle, and tuck it under. Just munch it under there, and then just kind of sweep those little threads underneath, and then I'll sharpen that point again, and away I go down the other side. Now, when you're tucking a flag under, you might see some of your threads because what it does is it lifts that applique piece up off the background a little bit. So some of your thread might show at a tip, which is why we always use matching thread. If you have matching thread, you're trying to get those pieces underneath there, it won't show. Okay, I'm just going to take a couple more stitches so you can see. Now, can you see that point? You can kind of see my stitches because it needs to be the yellow thread, but that, because it elevates the applique shape up off the background a little bit, you might see some thread there, so that's why you want to match. But also, people are worried about that knot of, there's a bulk of fabric under there, and it doesn't matter. Because once you layer this with your batting, that little knot of fabric is going to be lost in the batting. All right, so you'll notice there's a little bit of puckering on my background here, and that's because when you're stitching, especially by hand, it's going to shrink your block a tiny bit, just a tiny bit. And we'll press that and it'll be fine, and when we have it all quilted, it'll be just fine. But it reminded me of a tip, and it's nice to cut your background a little bit larger than what you need, and then after you're done stitching, trim it out. So I've cut this background to 9 inches The finished block size is 8 inches, so we're going to need an 8.5 inch block. So I'm going to trim now. So let's just move this out of the way. I've got my cutting mat here, and I don't want to trim this one because I'm not done stitching, but this one I already stitched and I haven't trimmed. So I'm just going to place my ruler, and this happens to be one of the cute cut rulers, which is 8.5 inches exactly, but you can get any ruler and just measure your 8.5 inches, but just make sure that you've centered your little bird, and keep in mind that he's still got to have legs, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I need a rotary cutter. Here we go. And I'm going to trim that off. Don't ever do this. You shouldn't cut under your arm like that. Only special teachers can do that. You're supposed to turn your work and cut away from your body. Let's be safe, right? All right. Okay, so now the block is trimmed and he's all ready to be put into a project. There's one thing missing though, and that's his feet. You'll notice in the pattern, they've got some cute little feet on this bird. And so I am going to probably embroider those with some black floss. You could also use a Pigma marker or a fabric marker to just draw those on. But anyway, I think I'll embroider those. All right, so we're done with that. Thanks so much for watching. I'm going to turn the time over now to Christopher, who's going to show you some foundation paper piecing.